And why do I start out with something is wrong? Well, it's because of a problem that was my fault when Nora was going through the process. Nora early on knew that something was wrong, and she kept complaining about that something wasn't right, that things were happening. And I kept saying, oh, don't worry about it. You're just getting older and so forth, and kind of poo-pooed the idea that something was wrong. She badgered her doctor into getting a test. And it was a neuropsychology test that took 2 days, and it was 4 to 6 hours on that. And there was something wrong. And so the reason I start out with, I know something is wrong, is that we need to believe the person when they say, I think something is wrong. And we need to encourage them to basically go to the doctor and get tested. There's nothing wrong with being tested. If you pass the test and there's nothing wrong, you have a great baseline and you feel better about what's going on, and you can look for other reasons for why you think there's something wrong. If there is something wrong, it's good to catch it in the beginning, because that's when you're most successful in dealing with the issue on that. So I learned a valuable lesson from that. And that was that when people are complaining that, you know, my memory is not as good as it used to be, I encourage them to get tested. It's not an invasive test, it's a written test. And it takes, and again, I would take the 4 to 6 hour test. I would not take the 10 question test in the primary doctor's office, because in the support groups, most people pass that test, but really they had issues on that. Many people take little memory lapses and think they're getting Alzheimer's disease or dementia. Memory loss that disrupts daily life is the critical symptom of Alzheimer's or other dementia. So the real issue is, if you're having memory issues, is it disrupting your daily life? If it's disrupting your daily life, then there probably is something going on in relation to it. Here are 10 warning signs and symptoms that every individual may experience, one or more of these signs to a different degree. If you experience multiple signs of these, then go see a doctor and get tested. Again, the critical one is that memory loss that disrupts daily life. One of the most common signs of Alzheimer's is memory loss, especially forgetting recently learned information. Others include forgetting important dates or events, asking for the same information over and over, increasingly needing to rely on memory aids, such as calendars, iPhones, and so forth, and family members for things they used to handle on their own. But what's a typical age-related change? Sometimes forgetting names or appointments, but remembering them later. Another warning sign is challenges in planning and solving problems. Some people may experience changes in their ability to develop and follow a plan or work with numbers. They may have trouble following a familiar recipe or keeping track of monthly bills. They may have difficulty concentrating or taking much longer to do things that they did in a very short period of time when they were familiar with it. What's a typical age-related change? Making occasional errors when balancing a checkbook. My wife one time spent 3 days trying to balance the checkbook. And when she was finished, I looked at the balance and I looked at the bank, and the numbers weren't even close. She was not capable of balancing the checkbook. That's not necessarily a memory issue. That's a loss of function on that. And that's one of the other things that I want to point out in terms of dementia and Alzheimer's. It's not just memory loss. Offshoot and a symptom of memory loss is there, but there's also an issue with being able to follow a plan or being able to put basically going from A to C through B, A to B to C. One time I asked my wife to set the table. She went to the drawer, pulled out the silverware, turned around, looked at the table, looked at the silverware, turned around and put the silverware back. She was not capable of setting the table. Difficulty completing familiar tasks at home, at work, or at leisure. People with Alzheimer's or dementia often find it hard to complete daily tasks. Sometimes people may have trouble driving to a familiar location, managing a budget at work, or remembering the rules of a favorite game. What's a typical age-related change? Occasionally needing help to use the settings on a microwave, or asking your grandchildren to record a television program. That was a joke, by the way. We all have trouble with remotes on television shows. Confusion with time or place. People with Alzheimer's can lose track of dates, seasons, and passage of time. They may have trouble understanding something that is not happening immediately. Sometimes they may forget where they are or how they got there. What's a typical age-related change? Getting confused about the day of the week, but figuring it out later. Trouble understanding visual images and spatial relationships. For some people, having vision problems is a sign of dementia or Alzheimer's. They may have difficulty reading, judging distance, and determining color or contrast, which may cause problems. What's a typical age-related change? Vision changes related to cataracts. New problems with words or speaking and writing. People with dementia or Alzheimer's may have trouble following or joining a conversation. They may stop in the middle of a conversation and have no idea how to continue, or they may repeat themselves. They may struggle with vocabulary, have problems finding the right word, or call things by the wrong name. What's a typical age-related change? Sometimes having trouble finding the right word. Misplacing things and losing the ability to retrace steps. A person with Alzheimer's disease may put things in unusual places. They may lose things and be unable to go back and retrace their steps to find them. Sometimes they may accuse others of stealing. This may occur more frequently over time. What's a typical age-related change? Misplacing things from time to time and retracing steps to find them. Decreased or poor judgment. This is a critical one from my standpoint that many people don't realize with people with dementia and Alzheimer's. They really have difficulty in making good judgments about where they are, what's going on, and what's happening around them. People with Alzheimer's may experience changes in judgment or decision-making. For example, they may use poor judgment when dealing with money, giving large amounts to telemarketers. They may pay less attention to grooming or keeping themselves clean. Whenever my wife received a call from a charitable organization, she could not say no. She always donated money to them. I finally had to take the credit card away because she was not capable of saying no to a call on the phone. What's a typical age-related change? Making a bad decision once in a while. I'm sure we've all done that. Withdrawal from work or social activities. A person with dementia or Alzheimer's may start to remove themselves from hobbies, social activities, work projects, or sports. They are having trouble keeping up with a favorite sports team or remembering how to complete a favorite hobby. They may also be less social in the circumstances. Remember the Maslow's hierarchy of chart, and then we talked about the people who are diagnosed descend that chart. In other words, from self-actualization through relationships. And so as they're descending that chart, that's what kind of these things are talking about. Withdrawal from work or social activities is a descending the chart. What's a typical age-related change? Sometimes feeling weary of work, family, and social obligations. And changes in mood and personality. The mood and personalities of people with Alzheimer's can change. They can become confused, suspicious, depressed, fearful, or anxious. They may be easily upset at home, at work, with friends or places where they are out. What's a typical age-related change? Developing very specific ways of doing things and becoming irritable when a routine is disrupted. Routine is extremely important to people with dementia and Alzheimer's. If they do the same thing over and over again, there's comfort in that. And when that routine is broken or breaks up, then they become irritable because they can't keep up with the change, so to speak. Again, going back to the poor judgment and going back to not being able to process information rapidly enough. This is a little chart that was put together that signs of Alzheimer's or dementia and typical age-related changes. It's kind of a review of just what we went over. Poor judgment and decision-making is a sign of dementia or Alzheimer's. Making a bad decision once in a while is typical age-related changes. Inability to manage a budget, missing a monthly payment versus missing a monthly payment. Losing track of the date or the season versus forgetting which day it is and remembering it later. Difficulty having a conversation versus sometimes forgetting what word to use. Misplacing things and being unable to retrace steps to find them. Losing things from time to time. Before I go further, I noticed there's 2 chats. Is there any questions?
Yes, there are some. You mentioned visual problems. How does this impact on the ability to drive?
Well, on the surface, it would have a great impact on that. In fact, I know I've had cataract replacement, and I had trouble driving at night because of the cataracts. And then when I got them replaced, I realized that I had more trouble driving at night than I thought I had. And so to me, the biggest issue is that it affects driving, but the people who are driving, in a sense, argue against it in relation to it. There's going to be a module that we're going to talk about in the next 2 weeks, and it's going to basically be talking about hard decisions, and driving is one of those that we will talk about.
Thank you. What do you suggest as an aid related to misplacing objects? My loved one is forever losing a phone.
That's a difficult one. In some respects, I know that some people would have done is to, in effect, for example, putting a little chain or rope or twine on it and then kind of hanging it around the neck or something so that it's with them and they don't have to set it down on that. And I'm not sure what you would do about losing the phone, but I do know that there are occasions, for example, when my wife would empty the dishwasher, none of the dishes were in the right place. And so in a support group, a person suggested put labels on the cupboards. And so I got a label gun and I labeled the cupboards, cups, saucers, bowls, and so forth. And that seemed to help about where to put things. And so what you might do is put a big basket or something by the door and put a big sign on it and say phone, and then have the person, when they come in, put the phone there. And when they leave, they can pick the phone up from there. But something like that might be of help.
Okay, thank you. I don't see any more.
Okay. What type of dementia a person has will make a difference in understanding, coping, and medical supplies. The person who is doing caregiving needs to know, in my view, what kind of dementia the person has. And that's why I stress very strongly getting a diagnosis, because that tells you what kind of dementia. Remember, we're talking about different types of dementia, and the different types of dementia attack different parts of the brain and have different speeds in which they flow. Early onset Alzheimer's is like standard Alzheimer's, except that it comes on much earlier. It comes on in the 40s and 50s of the individual. And it moves faster than standard Alzheimer's disease. If you go back and remember the chart, early onset was 4 to 10, standard Alzheimer's was 15 to 25 years. Lewy body attacks the frontal lobe, and that attacks your ability to make decisions and so forth. People with Lewy body have less of a problem in the early stages with memory loss. And so in a way, it's kind of confusing. I believe Nora suffered from that because it was the Lewy body portion of her dementia that prevented her from putting together the reference desk. She was managed a library, branch library in Northern California, and they were redesigning the reference area, and she couldn't put the design together. And it impacted her so much that she basically changed jobs on that. And that again goes back to this idea that I know something is wrong. But Lewy body behaved differently. We didn't have any idea that it was Alzheimer's. It wasn't until she got a formal diagnosis in 2009 that we found out that she had early onset Alzheimer's on that. But the Lewy body exhibited itself and the early onset exhibited itself when she was basically 47 to 48, 49 years old. Yeah, but we didn't know that. We only knew that in retrospect. Frontal temporal has a different flow and a different impact than the other three dementias, and vascular is due to strokes on that, and strokes can affect different parts of the brain. So you need to get your diagnosis to be able to tell what kind of Alzheimer's and dementia you're going to be dealing with, and that will, in my view, it's better to have more information about what's going on than to try and guess what's going on, because you're going to have a multi-year process. And to me, it was more comfortable knowing what the process was and what was happening in terms of the disease than if I didn't get it, if she didn't get a diagnosis and we kept wondering what was happening. How do they make a diagnosis? They make a diagnosis, in effect, pretty much in some respects like they do other things. They eliminate all other causes. There really isn't a direct test that's not invasive for Alzheimer's or dementia. So they go about and eliminate all other activities. They eliminate such things as brain tumors, and that's why they might do a CT scan or an MRI, is to eliminate a brain tumor on that. They may talk about your medications and see if there isn't some situation where the medication's either in conflict or the side effect of a medication is memory on that. So they try to eliminate all other causes. As I mentioned before, the quick oral testing by a physician, the 10 questions and so forth, in the support group, most people did not respond well to that, not by in terms of they would pass it, but yet something was wrong in relation to it. To me, the only real true test is the multi-hour written test administered by a neuropsychologist. If the quick test or the insistence of the person indicated issues, then the physician may recommend a follow-up test. Nora had to badger her doctors into getting the test. Because in a way she would kind of pass the quick 10 question test, but there was something wrong on that. This test again can last 2 to 4 hours and may take over, 2 to 8 hours, and may take over 2 days. Later on, she got a CT scan or an MRI, and then as part of a drug trial, she had a spinal fluid, basically a spinal tap. There is a value of the beta amyloid fluid in the blood, in the spinal fluid, and if it's over a certain value, then there's almost a 1-to-1 correlation for Alzheimer's in relation to that. So when they did the spinal tap and tested the fluid, her beta amyloid was much higher than the scheduled allowed, and my misspelling there. Again, in 2008, Nora was psychologically tested after badgering the doctor, and they gave her a diagnosis of mild cognitive impairment. In other words, she did have difficulties in relation to it. They tried to tell us that it did not necessarily lead to Alzheimer's disease, but about 4 or 5 months after she had the test, she continued to insist that there was something more going on. There was something happening that was not good. And so in 2009, she badgered her doctor again to retest. And in that case, she was formally diagnosed with early onset Alzheimer's because she was 56 at the time she was diagnosed. They indicated the typical lifespan was 4 to 10 years, and it moved faster than the standard Alzheimer's disease. Well, what was our reaction? We had multiple reactions. We needed time to digest the results. It was a shock because it was official. Your reaction will be determined in part by your history, relationship, empathy, and compassion. History, how you react to bad medical news in the past about others, especially those close to you. How you reacted to them in the past may be very much how you're reacting to it now on that. The relationship, how healthy and good is the relationship with the person, will influence your reaction on that. Empathy, your ability to put yourself into the other person's position and understand how they might feel and react. Compassion, your ability to have compassion, understanding and concern for the other person, as well as for yourself. That's a critical piece, having compassion for yourself in this process as a caregiver on that. Because if your friend were going through this, you would have compassion for your friend because it would be a difficult situation that you're going through. Well, you can have compassion for yourself because of the situation you're in. Some of the things that you may have as reactions are, am I embarrassed? Do I hide it? Do I talk about it? I would highly recommend that you not hide it and that you do talk about it. And we'll talk about that in a little bit later. All these reactions are very normal. They can include sadness, fear, anger, hostility, why me, and or denial. Reactions, except denial, are quite normal to me and not unexpected. These reactions should not last a long time or become overwhelming. If they do, then one should see a therapist to help them cope with the emotions that they are feeling. This includes the person diagnosed as well as the caregiver on this. What are the first steps? Discuss the situation. How do you feel about this? What do you want me to do? What scares you the most? What scares me the most? What things do I or we want to do before we are unable to do them? In one of the support groups, a woman got a diagnosis, just early diagnosis, and she basically told her husband that I want to go to Paris before we can. And so they planned a trip to Paris, and they went to Paris for a week so that they could do that before it was not possible to travel on that. Those are things that you need to do. So it's not necessarily all bad news, but you need to talk about it. If you cannot openly discuss the situation with the person, then seek out a therapist for the two of you, and definitely for yourself. And when I say that you cannot discuss the situation with your person, that includes the receiver talking to the caregiver. Because in some cases, rarely, but in some cases, the caregiver may be in denial and the receiver isn't. And so don't be afraid to talk about it. I sought out a therapist to help me deal with two things. My feelings. Why am I reacting in a certain way and coping with these feelings? Anger was one of the reactions I had. My behavior is, in many cases, the result of how I reacted to similar situations in my life, especially in my formative years. I needed to understand this so I can be a better caregiver. An example, a person in a support group did not want to place their receiver in a memory care facility. Why? Because they didn't want to come home to an empty house. Well, they went to a therapist, and what they learned was that it was a result of being a latchkey kid. A latchkey kid was one where both parents worked, and when they came home from school, they had a key and they would go into an empty house. And this was impacting their decision 20, 30 years later in relation to how they were dealing with the care receiver on that. The second reason that I thought out a therapist was a reality check on how am I coping with the situation? How am I taking care of myself on that? Yeah, it turned out that the therapist was a very important piece of the reality check. because I wasn't necessarily at times being honest with myself about what was going on. And I wasn't necessarily at times being honest about the evaluation of what was going on in relation to it. So they were a reality check for me. They were able to say, hey, that's not what's happening on that. You need to understand that the dementia process will be a long, extended mourning period. The person before you will be slowly receding and will become someone that is not the person you fell in love with, not the person that you want to marry or be a partner, nor your father, nor your mother, if that is the circumstance on that. That's a hard concept to accept and to understand, that it is the person in front of you that's been diagnosed that will be leaving, that will be receding. The person you fell in love with, married or partnered, or your mother or father, will become a memory to deal with, because they will still be physically there and in front of you. The problem is what people have called, and I call, cognitive dissonance. You look at the person in front of you. Nora looked physically perfectly normal, but she wasn't. And so you have this disjuncture between, gee, the person in front of me looks perfectly normal, but she really isn't normal. And so you have this conflict going on. And in many respects, you want to hope and wish, and you pretend, so to speak, that the person who looks normal to you in front is normal. You will go through most of the steps of the mourning process, and we will deal this in the next session on the mourning process on that. Okay, I think there's one question.
I have a question.
Yes.
I'd like to know, how do you find out? My loved one was diagnosed with vascular. How do you find out the difference in vascular?
With from the other dementias?
Yes, the doctor mentioned vascular for him, and he had 3 strokes.
Right.
And he believes one of these strokes caused him to have the memory loss.
Yeah. I would go to alz.org.
AOZ?
ALZ, Alzheimer's.
AOZ,
Alpha Larry Zebra.
Okay, .org.
.org. And also
Okay.
I would Google vascular dementia.
I did that, and it didn't tell me enough.
Okay. Well, try the Alzheimer's organization website.
Okay.
And kind of go from there. And if you still have problems, then let me know next week and I'll see what I can do.
Okay, thank you. And one other question.
Mm-hmm.
My loved one does not believe he has this.
Say that again, please.
My loved one does not believe that he has dementia.
That's not uncommon. And I'm going to go through that in just a few minutes here.
Thank you.
In terms of denial.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
There are questions in the chat too. So I read that it's better for people with Alzheimer to socialize, but my loved one is reluctant to see people, even family members. Should I accept that, or should I encourage him to socialize? If the individual doesn't want to tell anyone and it is in denial, but the caregiver would prefer not to be secretive, what can you do? So just 2 questions.
Okay, two parts to that question. The one is, I did not try and get Nora to do things that she didn't want to do, generally speaking. Part of the reason they don't want to socialize is they can't keep up in the conversation. They get confused and they can't find the right words. And sometimes they will say things that are totally out of context and people will look at them strangely and so forth. So in a way, it's a rational response on their part to kind of shy away from social contact because it doesn't go well. It's not smooth for them. And so I would, the only time that I found Nora to be really social was when she was with their care receivers. When she was with them in the memory care, she was very social. and would talk with them and so forth. Many times I had no idea what they were talking about. The context wasn't there. I understood the words, but I didn't understand the meaning of the words that they were using. And so from my standpoint, I would try and put them in a situation where they're with other people who have been diagnosed rather than with people who are not diagnosed on that. The second part of the question, could you repeat the second part, please?
If the individual doesn't want to tell anyone and is in denial, but the caregiver would prefer not to be secretive, what can you do?
I will get to that in a few minutes, but the upshot is that I found it to be extremely helpful, whether she wanted me to or not, to tell people that she had Alzheimer's, especially places that we went back to repeatedly. For example, a restaurant. We would go to 3 or 4 restaurants all the time. And when we went to those restaurants, I would tell the person who was our server, generally it was the same server all the time, tell her that Nora had Alzheimer's. And I found that to be very comforting, whether she liked it or not, because if I had to get up and go to the bathroom, they would kind of watch out for her and make sure that she just didn't get up and leave the restaurant. The other thing I found out was that they had a lot of compassion and were very nice to her. She would come and sometimes the menu would be too confusing for her to pick something. And they would say, well, last time you were in here, you had this dish. And she says, oh, okay, I'll have that dish. And so I found them to be very helpful to me because I could relax, so to speak, and kind of enjoy the process as opposed to being on edge all the time. My view would be is I would not hide it. It's like a broken arm. It's not visible. I would not hide it. I would not necessarily stand on the street corner and broadcast it. But if I go to the same places all the time, I would tell the people that what's going on. So that one, if she ever shows up by herself, they know what's happening. And if I'm there and we get disconnected, they will kind of help watch out for her or him on that.
There was another question, but I believe you answered it about what kind of doctor to seek for the diagnosis.
Your primary physician should recommend a neuropsychologist, and if not a neuropsychologist, at least a neurologist, and let a neurologist, in a sense, recommend a neuropsychologist or provide the test on that. It is a specialty, and I would recognize that it is a specialty and that you need the specialty, the specific skill sets of a neurologist and a neuropsychologist to do the diagnosis. Okay. When you do get to the diagnosis and you've kind of recovered a little bit from it, there are 3 major things that need to be discussed and agreed upon with the person who's been diagnosed. 3 areas. One's financial, one's legal, and one's end of life. In financial matters, do we open a trust? We opened a trust. And one of the things in my research, what was highly recommended was that we remove the care receiver's name from all financial instruments. And one of the ways to do that is to open a trust. And in the trust, you would move the assets, the debts, and policies into the trust and out of the care receiver and even the caregiver's name on that. For example, the cars, your RV, your home, your investments, your personal effects, debts such as car loans, home mortgages, secured, unsecured loans, policies. In the mortgage, we put the house into the trust. So in effect, the trust owned the house. It wasn't in either of our names on that. And what's interesting is that in 2009, as you remember, we were coming out of the financial crash on that. And when we moved up to Oregon in 2011, our house was underwater in California. In other words, the value of the house was less than the value of the mortgage on that. So it being in the trust, we rented the house out while we moved up to Oregon. When the house basically resurfaced, it was more valuable than the mortgage, I was able to sell that house without having to involve Nora. Nora was not capable of signing. She was not capable of understanding what was going to happen and so forth. And so I could take care of that situation without bringing her into the process. If the mortgage was still in her name, I would have had to go to court to either get a guardianship or to invoke the power of attorney or to get the court to say I was capable of making that decision without her on that. And that makes it extremely difficult to close on a deal such as selling a house and so forth. So a trust to me is essential in the terms of the financial process on that. You need to check your policies like property insurance, life insurance, car insurance. What does it cover? What doesn't it cover? If a person has been diagnosed, for example, on car insurance, if a person has been diagnosed with dementia, is there a statement in the car insurance policy that they will not cover an accident in relation to it? That to me is an important piece of information that you need to know. There were policies, for example, long-term care policy that I took out when I joined Wells Fargo in 1995. I got a family policy for long-term care. And when Nora was diagnosed in 2009, what I found was that there was fine print in the long-term policy. And that fine print was that Nora had to apply for the policy on her own. When they approved it, then she was folded up underneath the family policy. Well, in essence, she wasn't covered. So the long-term care policy wouldn't basically help me out from an expense standpoint for her. So when you get the diagnosis and it's early enough, she would be capable of signing. So she would be capable of going through the process of that. Again, we try to remove the receiver's name from financial instruments and put it into a trust. I found that there were two areas where it was extremely difficult to remove her name. One was debit cards and the other was credit cards. The bank would not remove her name from the credit card, even though I had guardianship. They needed her signature to do that. So what I did was take the card away. And another person in the support group, what he did was close the account and then open the account with just his name or with the trust name on it. And that way, then he was able to remove her name from the card. Well, that may be very difficult because of our electronic world where our credit card information is spread all over. So changing a credit card number would not be an easy thing to do on that. The debit card, they couldn't take the name away, and she couldn't say no to a charity, so I just took the debit card away on that. Beneficiary name, beneficiary of policies, change it to a trust. For example, I took our life insurance policies that I took out in 1995, and I had Nora as the beneficiary, and I changed it to the trust. There was another account called deferred compensation account, and that was when Wells Fargo would give a bonus, we could defer that bonus. We could put it into this deferred compensation account, and up to 10 years, we could wait up to 10 years to basically get the bonus. Well, as we were going deep into the memory care, I was beginning to want to tap the deferred compensation account for the money. I wanted to get a lump sum. The bank that had the deferred compensation account would not allow me to take a lump sum out without her signature. I had to go to court. I got a hold of my attorney and I went to court to get a decree that I could change the beneficiary to me in the deferred compensation account so that I could get a lump sum in relation to it. in lieu of the lump sum, they would allow, for example, $800 a month to come to you. But when the bills are $5,000 a month, $800 a month doesn't help you very much. So I wanted to take the whole balance of the account out so that I could pay for memory care on that. She was not capable of rationally signing a document or understanding what she was even signing. So that's why I had to go to court to change that. But these are things that can be done early on. Again, review your healthcare insurance and your long-term care insurance. Is the person 65 or over? How much, what will Medicare cover? What will health insurance cover? If they're under 65, do you have health insurance? What does it cover? What does it not cover? Do you have long-term care? And you have to watch out for the footnotes on long-term care, as I mentioned. Because of the sensitivity of these issues to the perception and feelings of the care receiver, it may be very difficult. Because what's happening? You're removing their name from these critical documents and assets. And that could be very difficult for the care receiver to understand what's going on, and very difficult for the care receiver to accept. They think they're being dismissed. They think they're being abandoned. They may think they're losing their independence. This is where a therapist really helps, because a therapist, again, can work with that person and help them to understand that this is actually doing something for them, not trying to dismiss them or trying to walk away from them or trying to make them less independent in relation to it. All this activity is for their benefit. For example, the trust actually had a statement that the benefit of the trust was for Nora. It was to enable Nora to be able to continue to get the kind of care that she needed and wanted. The second thing you need to discuss is legal matters. There's two more things I want to talk about, and then we'll take some questions. Legal matters. You need to see a lawyer to create a trust for the financial tasks listed above. You need to discuss the types of trusts to create to remove the diagnosed as owner or beneficiary. There's a revocable living trust versus an irrevocable trust. The revocable living trust, also known as a revocable trust or a living trust or an inter vivos trust, is simply a trust that can be changed at any time. In other words, if you have second thoughts about a provision in the trust or change your mind about who should be a beneficiary or a trustee of the trust, then you can go in and modify it through a lawyer. And it's called a trust amendment. Or if you decide that you don't like anything about the trust at all, then you can either revoke the entire agreement or change the entire contents through a trust amendment or a restatement. Why should you use a revocable living trust as part of your estate planning? Three important reasons. To plan for mental disability. Assets held in the name of a revocable living trust at this time of a person with a revocable trust agreement will remain a, I got confused. Assets held in the name of a revocable living trust at the same time a person becomes incapacitated can be managed by their disability trustee instead of by a court-supervised guardian or conservator. In other words, you're setting up the trust because the person who has been diagnosed will become incapable of managing their own affairs. And so the trustee of the trust will manage their affairs for their benefit. It will also avoid probate. Assets held in the name of a revocable living trust at the time of a person's death will pass to the beneficiaries named in the trust agreement and outside of the probate process. I can attest to that. When Nora died, I did not go through probate. I had no interruption of financial access to assets and so forth because of the trust, and I was the trustee on that. It was seamless. I hate to say it that way, but it was seamless when she passed on that. And also to protect the privacy of your property and beneficiaries after you die. I'm not sure how important that is, but if it is, a trust hides, is not a public document. And if you go through probate, that is a public process because that is a court process and court proceedings are public. on that. An irrevocable trust. An irrevocable trust is a trust, simply a type of trust that can't be changed after the agreement has been signed. In other words, if you make an irrevocable trust, once you make that trust and move the assets and so forth into that trust, it cannot be changed, even if you change your mind. These trusts are commonly used to remove the value of property from a person's estate so that the property can't be taxed when the person dies. In other words, the person who transfers assets into the irrevocable trust is giving over those assets to the trustee and beneficiaries of the trust, so that person does not own those assets anymore. Another common use of an irrevocable trust is to provide asset protection for the trust maker and the trust maker's family. This works in the same way that an irrevocable trust can be used to reduce estate taxes by placing the assets into the trust. The trust maker is giving up complete control over and access to the trust assets. And therefore, the trust assets cannot be reached by a creditor of the trust maker or an available resource for Medicaid planning. Another common use of an irrevocable trust is to accomplish charitable estate planning, such as through a charitable remainder trust or a charitable lead trust. An irrevocable trust, in my view, has been used more when there has been a divorce and there's stepchildren involved. In some cases, the family wants to make sure that a certain set of children, stepchildren, get certain assets from the estate. And so they may create an irrevocable trust, moving those assets into that trust and then having that trust be for the benefit of the stepchildren. That way, then, unlike a revocable trust, the other person can't change that trust and exclude the stepchildren from the trust. So there are reasons for having an irrevocable trust. That's why you need to talk to your lawyer, and that's why you need to get a lawyer involved with your process. Guardianship versus conservatorship. A guardian is someone who is appointed by a court to protect and care for the health and well-being of the incapacitated person or minor child. A petition must be filed with the court and notice given to all interested parties that a process may be complicated. A conservator is a fiduciary who is appointed by a court to protect and conserve the assets of an incapacitated person or minor child. In other words, a guardian is focused on the well-being of the person. A conservator is focused on the fiduciary aspects of it. My experience, I had to go to court to get a guardianship for Nora because the placement that I put her in required guardianship. And the process was relatively simple, at least in the state of Oregon. I was given temporary guardianship of Nora while the state conducted its investigation. I provided a doctor's statement on the condition of Nora's Alzheimer's disease. Again, get a diagnosis. That will become very important in certain cases, such as guardianship. A court-appointed person went to interview Nora at the facility. The person was interviewed by the person who was interviewed my daughter to determine if there were any objections from my daughter or any other children we had. We just had one daughter. And submitted a report to the court. After this was done, a judgment was made to give me permanent guardianship on that. This is what the guardianship looked like. This is the legal document that I got at the time. Okay, before I start end of life, there are some questions.
Yes, there is a question from Julia. I asked you last time about HIV-related memory loss and how it's similar or different. I'm experiencing many things you mentioned, but I'm high functioning, quote unquote. I guess one might say, but I'm concerned. I'm also 68. So I also have no one to take away grandma's keys, but find myself in situation where people react to my confusion and can be patronizing. Is it a good idea to tell people I'm experiencing memory loss? But how can I do so without them talking down to me?
There's several things there. I feel bad that you're having such an experience. It's not pleasant. One is I would get formally diagnosed. It's a lot easier when you talk to people that, gee, I have been diagnosed with Alzheimer's, or I have been diagnosed with Lewy body. They can react better to a formal diagnosis than reacting to, I think there's something wrong and I'm not sure what it is on that. So that might help a little bit in terms of the interaction with people. I'm also teaching this class at Ollie or Southern Oregon University, and there's a couple people in the class that basically have no support structure. They're by themselves. And that, I think, is an extremely difficult situation, to be by yourself and to be diagnosed. The best thing that I could suggest is to join a support group. One is you'll get in contact with a facilitator, and the facilitator may be able to help you out with resources in your community that can help you in lieu of the fact that there are other people not available on that. So that would be one avenue. I would talk to the Alzheimer's Association in your community also about your situation, because they may have some resources available to help you out as well, and to help provide a support structure for you if there is not a support structure available to you on that. How people react to you and react to your diagnosis is, again, it's difficult because you don't know. Like I said, people react the way they reacted when they're growing up in their formative years and as they go through life. In some cases, when people are told that the person they're talking to has a serious illness, they may be very sympathetic and they may be very helpful because that's the way they always responded to that kind of information. They may also be scared of that information and they may want to back away. They may feel that in a way, in quotes, contagious, and so I don't want to catch it, and so they back away, and that may be because of the way they grew up and so forth. It's very, very hard to predict why people react the way they do without knowing their history, and so from my standpoint would be to try and find somebody that you can talk with to talk about how you feel about people who do not sympathize with you or have empathy for you, or who may be angry or who may be hostile in relation to the situation, or who may back away from the situation, so that you can deal with your emotions on how you feel about it. I hope that's answered your questions.
I have a question.
Yes.
Okay. I had a day that was a perfect day with my loved person. And then the next day it was horrible. Can they be normal one day and then completely off the charts the next day?
Absolutely. And it's very, very difficult for the caregiver in that circumstance. Yeah. Not only with the care receiver, but with the caregiver, because the good day, the caregiver thinks, oh, gee, we're back to normal. God, that's great. And then the next day, what happened? What's going on? And so the caregiver is just as confused about what's happening as the care receiver on that. It's not a pleasant situation either way on that.
Thank you.
There are a couple more questions.
Okay.
Does a durable power of attorney achieve what a revocable living trust does in terms of avoiding conservatorship?
In one sense, yes, it does. But in another sense, to me, that there is a problem with that, because part of the durable power of attorney is there's a clause in there that states when the person becomes incapacitated. And so, or some language like that. That is not just a statement on the part of a person that says, hey, you know, my partner's incapacitated. You have to have proof that the person is incapacitated. In other words, you're going to have to bring some kind of medical information to the legal process to indicate that you have the power to be able to make those decisions. You don't have to do that with a trust. If you're the trustee of the trust, in a way, it doesn't matter what the situation is of the person, whether they're totally incapacitated or whether they're semi-incapacitated, or whether they have good days or bad days. It doesn't make a difference in relation to the trust. To me, yes, a power of attorney does it, but I think a trust makes it a lot easier. And again, I want to point out, less stressful on the part of the caregiver, because you don't have to deal with those kinds of issues about proving that the person is incapacitated on that.
Thank you. There's a very useful comment in the chat, actually. In Fairfax County, Virginia, there is a nonprofit called Insight Memory. They offer adult daycare and many support services such as workshops, support programs, and social programs.
Yes, that's true. And most communities have some form of support structure like that. We will be looking at some of this a little later next week or the following week in comparing what Oregon has and what Virginia has in relation to services for people who are looking for those kinds of services on that. Each state, it's all state dependent. Not every state is the same. And so, but yes, Virginia, Fairfax actually is a pretty good place in relation to it.
Question, another question.
Yes.
If for the person who does not believe that they are in this condition, none of these places work because you can't get them to go to those places.
That's where you need to look out for support group, and you also can contact the Alzheimer Association and ask them, how can I get this person to move in that direction? If you've been formally or they have been formally diagnosed, then you can use that diagnosis as a basis for breaking through on the denial. But it's going to be difficult because that's one of the hard pieces.
Thank you.
Okay.
One more. What is the difference between a guardianship and power of attorney? Just a follow-up from the same person.
When you invoke guardianship, then you have, in effect, control over that person in terms of making decisions for their health and for their well-being, and if it's involving conservatorship, over their money. Power of attorney, you have to invoke it. And so even though you make a power of attorney out, that doesn't mean that it's immediately available unless you specifically write it in such a way that it is immediately available. Most times power of attorneys are based on when the person becomes incapacitated. And again, the guardianship was required on my part because the placement institution required guardianship for me to place her there. And so it wasn't an option. I couldn't use a power of attorney in lieu of guardianship. It was required.
Okay.
On that.
Thank you. That's it at this point.
Okay. The third thing that needs to be looked at and discussed is probably the most difficult of all, and is, to me, the most important. And that is end of life, the advance directive. An advance directive states the healthcare measures a person wants if he or she cannot indicate to continue curative sustaining treatment. An advance directive can also indicate if the person wants to remove life support systems. The person must develop the advance directive while he or she is able to clearly and definitively express themselves in writing, sign language, or verbally. It must express the person's own free will about his or her health care, not anyone else's. In other words, you have to talk to the person who was diagnosed and basically ask them, how how do you want your life to end? Because the diagnosis is a terminal illness. The person is not going to get well or recover. And so these issues are very important. Oregon's law allows people to pre-authorize healthcare professionals to basically determine whether natural dying process, if they're medically confirmed to be in one of the conditions described. The law does not authorize euthanasia, assisted suicide, or any overt action to end life. In other words, the advance directive is not a document for assisted suicide. Nora's advance directive said, do not prolong the process. And so when I placed her, I took away certain medications that to me were prolonging the process, such as statins, cholesterol medicine, Aricel, which was supposed to slow down the process. And I was acting on her behalf, not my behalf. It didn't matter what view I had. It didn't matter what I thought. It was her view and her decision in relation to the advance directive on that. If you're going to be the agent for the person on the advance directive, you need to fully understand what that person wants in relation to end of life on that, because you have to speak for them, not for yourself. Many people have asked about a PULT versus advance directive. In Oregon, the PULT is a portable or physician-ordered life-sustaining treatment. On that, it's primarily for EMT people. In other words, if you passed out on the kitchen floor and the EMT people are there, the PULT is the document that's going to guide them about, should I be resuscitated? How much effort should I go through? Virginia adopted the concept from Oregon, calling it a POST, physician orders of scope of treatment. A POST is a physician-signed order form which communicates and puts into action treatment preferences when a patient is near the end of life. The Virginia POST form was modeled after the Oregon PULST form, which has been in use for almost 20 years. The POST form should be completed only after the patient, or if the patient lacks capacity, the patient's healthcare agent has a care planning discussion with a physician or a trained post-advanced care planning facilitator. So the POST or POST forms are appropriate for individuals with a serious illness or an advanced frailty near the end of life. The advance directive is basically indicating what to do as the person becomes incapacitated and approaches into life. And as we saw in the earlier sessions, this could be a multi-year process. Nora was not capable of speaking for herself for at least 4 years on that. And so, in effect, I was speaking for her through the advance directive for over 4 years on that. And it was important that I understood where she was in terms of her filling out the advance directive. Things to think about when filling out an advance directive. Who is going to be your agent to speak for you when you're unable to communicate your wishes? Does this person understand your wishes, and will they speak to them? Sometimes the personal agent may have very personal or religious objections to choices you've made. Will they set aside their objections and speak for you? If not, they should not be your designated agent. That's critical. When you want to pick an agent for your advance directive, this is caregivers as well as care receivers. If you want to pick an agent, you have to make sure that they can put aside their personal or religious objections and speak for you. If you do not want to be resuscitated, then they have to say to people, don't resuscitate you. That may be very difficult for people. So when you pick your agent, make sure they can speak for you and not for themselves. Some advance directives have a section, as I mentioned, do not prolong the process. This means, do you want to take medication or procedures to keep you alive? Such things as insulin, diet restrictions, maintenance medications for a medical condition, blood thinners, cholesterol reducers, and so forth. What do you want to have happen if you catch a potentially fatal illness like COVID-19? In Nora's case, she died before COVID-19, but if COVID-19 and she caught COVID-19, I would have followed the do not prolong the process. I would have said, do not ventilate her, because that's what she would have wanted. You need to think about things like assisted feeding. When you lose the capacity to feed yourself, do you want someone else to feed you? Do you want your agent to invoke voluntary stop eating and drinking? It's called VSAT. Do you want to financially drain the assets and leave your caregiver with minimal or no resources? In other words, how long do you want this process to go on? In terms of assisted feeding, I had to go to court. Nora was losing weight, and she lost about 30 pounds. They put her on hospice, and then she started to gain weight, and they took her off hospice. Then she lost weight again, about 20 pounds, and they put her on hospice. And I realized that the reason she started to gain weight was they started to spoon feed her. And in her advanced directive, again, do not prolong the process, she did not want to be spoon fed. So I went to my lawyer and asked them, what do we do about that? Her advanced directive says don't feed her. And they're saying that we have to feed her. So he said, well, we'll just go to court and get an injunction. Well, this was an interesting process because the ombudsman is the one who came in and understood that Nora was not being fed like other people. And so the ombudsman organization used the Attorney General's office of the state to get a lawyer to represent them. They asked that a lawyer represent Nora, even though I had guardianship. So the court appointed a lawyer for Nora, and I had my lawyer to talk about this. The court-appointed attorney for Nora talked to her daughter, talked to two of her friends of 30 years, and all agreed that she did not want to be spoon-fed. The upshot of the court was that the position of the ombudsman's organization was that there was an administrative rule that said that if you're in a facility that is governed by the state of Oregon, that you had to be offered 3 nutritious meals a day, and if you couldn't feed yourself, you had to be assisted. The ruling of the court was everyone understood, the judge said, everyone understood that Nora did not want to be spoon-fed. Her advanced directive, her friends, her daughter, her husband, all agreed that she did not want to be spoon-fed. However, I will not overturn the administrative rule that says that she's supposed to get 3 nutritious meals and be assisted in her feeding. In essence, we lost the case and they spoon-fed her. I felt that that decision, in effect, condemned Nora to the full gamut of the Alzheimer's disease. In other words, she lived another 14 months after the decision of the court in relation to that. It became somewhat of a cause célèbre. I was interviewed by the local media. There was an article that wound up in the USA Today. There was another article that wound up in the Washington Post, where it was talking about the issue of spoon feeding and whether that was appropriate or not when you had an advanced directive. I had an attorney in Minneapolis call me that he was a VSAT proponent, and he was giving a talk in Seattle, and he asked if he could use Nora's example for his speech, and I said yes, he could on that. So it was difficult. Other things to think about are: do you want to donate organs when you pass? Where do you want to die? Do you want to die in the home, memory care facility, other facility? We have planning. And okay, I think there's some questions. I'll take the questions.
Yes, there are. Is the post form filled with the local EMT system or just given to them when they show up?
What the people told me about the post form was to keep it in the freezer, and there was a refrigerator magnet that went on the door of the refrigerator that indicated pink, bright pink color, that indicated there was a pulse form in the freezer, and the EMT would look for that pulse form and would then pull it out and use that as a mechanism. So the EMT people actually look for that pulse form when they come into a home or they come into a situation to determine what can they do and what they cannot do.
Okay, thank you. Next one. I am POA and HCP for a person who is a level 1 sex offender. He does have dementia and is 74. The facility he is at has interfered with my moving him to a facility where I can visit more easily. What do I need to know or do to circumvent what others have named as medical kidnapping at this facility? I live in Massachusetts.
That's where the guardianship comes in. That if you can get guardianship, then they cannot argue with your decision to place it on that. So I would talk to a lawyer about what your options are in terms of guardianship in relation to being able to make that decision about placement on that. That's part of the reason that the facility required guardianship for me, was that they did not want to get involved into legal disputes over whether it was appropriate for Nora to be placed or not. They did not want to get involved in the middle of a family dispute where possibly, I'm making this up now, where possibly the daughter says, no, she's fine, she doesn't need to be placed. And I say, yes, she does need to be placed. The facility did not want to be in the middle of that discussion. So that's why they demanded guardianship on that. So my suggestion would be is to go talk to a lawyer and see what can be done to facilitate the decision of placing it.
Okay, thank you. No more questions. No, hold on just a second. Can the post form only be initiated when person is seriously ill, or is it like a DNR that you can have it now in your will?
Say that again.
Okay, well, we're talking about the post form.
Yes.
Can it be only initiated when the person is seriously ill, or is it like a DNR that you can have it now in your will?
The DNR in the will does not replace the post. The post, again, is for EMT people, whereas the DNR may be part of the a document that gives you control over the healthcare of the person. The post is really filled out by the person, not by the guardian or by the caregiver. Nora filled out the post for herself, and it was for her. And that told the EMT people, this is what I, Nora, want in relation to being resuscitated or do not resuscitate in relation to it. So you can have the statement in your will and all that, but in a way, the will only comes into play after you've passed. So the DNR wouldn't really be involved with a will. So it would have to be involved with a power of attorney or with an advance directive. My view would be is do the advance directive, because that's specifically related to the conditions of what we're talking about.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. We have 10 minutes to go.
Okay. Planning. You need to figure out what resources are available and how much you'll be able to afford for caregivers and possibly memory care facilities. What assets are available for financing the disease? Are the assets liquid or immediately available? Are you working? Are you retired? What does the health insurance say? Are you covered both by Medicare or not? What about the 401k or the retirement plans? What kind of situation is that? Can I get a lump sum withdrawal, or is it just monthly payments? Can I have a hardship withdrawal and so forth? What do I do if there are not sufficient resources? You have to investigate supplemental resources available at the national, state, and local level. At the national level, it's Obamacare, Medicaid, Medicare. States have to extend Medicaid through Obamacare to have it cover specifically memory care facilities. It's written into the Medicaid rules under Obamacare when they extend Medicaid. But Virginia has extended Medicaid, Oregon has extended Medicaid. Some states have not extended Medicaid, and if they have not extended Medicaid, then Medicaid will not cover the memory care facilities and so forth. State available resources, you can see in Oregon, for example, there's area agencies on aging that provide assistance for senior benefit programs and so forth. There are programs such as transportation, home delivered meals, prescription drug programs, healthy aging, caregiving training, senior activities, support groups, volunteering. With Virginia has the Offices of Aging Services, Dementia Services. This department focuses on dementia and provides services for caregivers and the diagnosed. Major areas of services for caregivers are adult daycare, care transitions, case management, check-ins, chores, chronic disease self-management, communication, counseling services, meals, ombudsman, option counseling, personal care services, and public guardianships and residential repair and so forth. So there's a lot of services available from the Offices of Aging Services and Dementia Services in Virginia. At the county and city level, there, for example, Ashland Senior Center provides meals, information, assistance, case management, in-home care, pre-admission screening, food stamps, medical supplies, and so forth. In Fairfax County, Virginia, they have adult daycare, they have adult protective services, they have caregiver support programs, they have home repair, in-home care, Medicaid, they have Insight memory care, mental health services. A lot of services are offered in the Fairfax County. You need to talk with your family, and you need to develop, in a sense, you need to talk finances with the family. Do they want to help? Can they help? What's the level of assistance they can or will they? You need to talk about caregiving tasks, working on a schedule that provides relief for you. And you might also have to do relocation, having the family move in with you, or you move into their home, or you move closer to your family. On that, we talked about the sandwich situation in terms of the relocation. If you move in with your family, you may wind up in a situation to where your son or daughter has children and they're also having you in the home. That's a good situation, but it's also a difficult situation in relation to that. Okay, any more questions? Any other comments?
Yes, I have one. You said about everything in Virginia. I live in Maryland. I'm just close by. What have we got?
Okay, I'll look that up and see what I can do about that. But what I would do is where in Maryland do you live?
Prince George's County.
I would contact the county government and ask them what services you have for people who are in your situation.
Okay, thank you.
And they should have equivalent services. They may not have all of them, or they may have some others, but they should have a lot of services for the people, and they will direct you, I think, to the right people to talk about what's available and what can help you.
Thank you very much.
How can I download these notes from your PowerPoint? There's actually a response to the previous question. Maryland Department of Aging, and there is a link in the chat if you look at this. So that's where you can go to. In terms of notes, if you don't mind, I'll answer that. The recordings of our sessions are on YouTube channel for Ollie, just as a additional information source.
Thank you.
You can, I send this PowerPoint out to the people who have attended. If you are part of the roster, so to speak, of this class, you will get a copy of it. If you're not, then contact Michelle Romano, and she will forward to you the PowerPoint because she gets a copy of it. And so if you send her an email, she will forward that to you.
Thank you.
Can I throw in also for anybody that's new, if you don't have my email, it is 2facts2@gmail.com. That's T as in Tom, U as in university, F as in Frank, A as in Apple, X is an X-ray, the number 2@gmail. For people that I do have your email addresses, I'll get you those slides already. I already have you. I'd like to also say, Bill, as Irina said, everything is posted on the YouTube channel. Both of them are up now. If there are certain slides you want, as you're watching the YouTube again, you can also keep your cell phone ready and take a picture of the slide as it's going on. Just a thought. And again, thank you, Bill.
You're welcome.
Also, my name is Van Jewel Graham. Am I on your email? Because I've been with you for a while.
Van Jewel, yes, I have you.
Okay, thank you. Keep up with me, please.
You're doing great.
Okay.
Any other comments or questions?
No, just a comment in the chat, which I joined in the spirit. This is an awesome training, and thank you so much. I don't see any more questions unless I'll give it another minute. We'll have 3 minutes to go. So if anybody, please feel free to unmute and ask the question if you have one.
This is an awesome disease, and I'm new at this, and I'm just awestruck about it, especially since I have someone who says I don't have this, and like you said, it does make it harder. Yeah. It's a fight.
Yeah, well, you have to realize that everyone is new to it first time around.
Okay.
You're not alone. By the way, I do have one question, and that's for Jerry Paulson. What is that picture of?
That's an image from the new Webb Space Telescope, and it's a ring galaxy.
I thought so. I thought I recognized that. That's neat.
So glad you enjoy it. Thank you for all your help with this information that you're providing.
You're welcome. And I want to remind you that on October 18th, we will have a lawyer come and talk.
Great.
And so in effect, you will have an hour and a half of free lawyer time in this presentation. And so save your questions about trusts and the legal issues that you may be facing. And it's Loretta Williams. She talked last year, and she will talk about some things in the beginning, and then she kind of opens it up for Q&A. So that's to help you out, especially with Medicaid, because the issue with Medicaid is that there's a 5-year look back. And that's to prevent you from basically 1 month before you apply for Medicaid, turning over all your assets to your children so that you can claim that you don't have any money. Her information will be very helpful, and especially for those who may need Medicaid, it would behoove you to attend that session, because she will talk a little bit about what you need to do to structure and be eligible for Medicaid. You will need a lawyer.
Thank you.
Thank you, Bill.
Bill, I'd like to also tell everyone, Bill, that All your slides are available in book form. You can order it on Amazon. It is inexpensive. As Bill said, he gets 35 cents for each book. It is well worth it to have that reference and all those slides in one place.
Okay, and at the end of this series, then we'll send out that link to the book again.
Perfect.
Thank you. I'd like to have that book.
There is a one more question, or rather request in the chat, but it has to be answered next time. You
No,
said
no, that's all right. If it's quick.
yes, you said that with early onset, the lifespan is 10 to 14 years. Can you talk more about that?
Let's save that for next time.
Yeah, we are a little out of
What's the
time.
name of the book?
The name of the book is the name of the class, Caregiving for Alzheimer's Disease, A Personal Journey. It's on Amazon.com. And the author is William L. Harris.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Bill, and we will see you next week. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. I'm going to stop sharing now.
Yes.
Thank you.